Let's go back to 2001. A 17-year-old girl named Alyssa Turney just vanishes from her home in Phoenix, Arizona. The police, well, they pretty quickly decide it's a runaway case. But her family? They knew something was seriously wrong. I mean, Alyssa had big plans. She was about to graduate. She wasn't the kind of person to just up and leave everything behind.
Now, what if I told you that the clue to solving this whole thing wasn't in some dusty evidence locker, but buried in a Reddit thread, just sitting there waiting for someone to connect the dots? For years, Alyssa's case was completely cold. And then in 2020, a single post on a subreddit called r/unresolved mysteries just blew the whole thing wide open, kicking off an online investigation that would finally expose a killer. So let's start at the beginning with Alyssa herself. She was this bright, ambitious teenager, but her life had been touched by tragedy early on. Her mom, Barbara, died from cancer when Alyssa was only 5. Her dad, Thomas, he remarried, and let's just say it created a really strained and difficult life for her at home.
Alyssa absolutely loved photography, and she had this dream of becoming a marine biologist. But at home, with her father Thomas being so stern and controlling, she told people all the time that she felt trapped. And that feeling? It all came to a head on May 17, 2001. It was the last day of her junior year, and she and her father got into a huge fight.
So here's the story Thomas spun for the police. He said she stormed out of the house, took a bus to school, but just never came home. Then he claimed she called him later that day, saying she was heading to California with a friend. And that was it. That was the last anyone supposedly heard from her. The police, well, they bought a story, and they closed the case.
But this is where the story takes a really dark turn. See, Thomas Turney wasn't just some grieving father. He was actually a convicted child molester. He'd even served time back in the 90s for abusing a minor. So when Alyssa disappeared, you'd think he'd be the obvious suspect, right? But with no evidence, no body, and no crime scene, the investigation just hit a complete dead end.
For almost 20 years, this case just collected dust. 20 years. But Alyssa's sister Sarah, she never ever gave up hope. She started websites, she made social media pages, she was just pleading for any information. But she kept hitting wall after wall. Then, in 2020, she had pretty much exhausted every single option. So she turned to a pretty unlikely place: Reddit.
Her post was so simple. All it said was, "Does anyone remember the story of the girl who disappeared from a Phoenix high school in 2001? The response was insane. It was immediate and completely overwhelming. People started sharing theories, digging up old news articles, and then one comment showed up that would change the entire course of this investigation.
A user who went by Mystery Finder 2020 posted a link. And this wasn't just any link. It was a link to a 2002 police report, a report that had never been made public. It detailed an interview with Thomas Turney, and wow, was it the first major breakthrough.
In that interview, right there in black and white, Thomas admitted he had lied about the day Alyssa disappeared. He confessed that Alyssa never called him from California. The entire story he told police, it was a total fabrication.
You know, this single lie? It was like a crack in a dam. The Reddit community just started digging, and what they found was absolutely chilling. The thread turned into this real-time living investigation. People were cross-referencing public records, and then they found something truly disturbing. Thomas Turney had been investigated for another young woman's disappearance, way back in the 1980s. That case was also written off as a runaway. And guess what? That woman was also never seen again.
All of a sudden, these digital detectives are connecting dots to police had missed for decades. Thomas Turney wasn't just a suspect in one disappearance. He was looking more and more like a potential serial predator. As the community started to realize they were looking at a pattern of violence, you could just feel the tension on that thread skyrocket.
One user, Detective Dan, meticulously pieced together a timeline of Thomas's movements on the day Alyssa vanished. And what did they find? A critical gap. 4 hours. 4 hours that Thomas could not account for at all.
Then, boom, another user unearths a property record from 2003. Just weeks after Alyssa disappeared, Thomas had rented a remote storage unit out near the desert. The thread started buzzing with this chilling question. Had they just found her burial site?
But the post that gave everyone chills came from a user claiming to be a former neighbor. This person wrote that Thomas had actually bragged about getting rid of a problem back in 2001. The neighbor had just dismissed it as drunken rambling at the time, but now they were terrified. This Reddit thread was no longer just a discussion forum. It had become a digital crime scene.
You better believe the police caught wind of this thread and started monitoring the posts. They saw all this evidence piling up. In 2021, they officially reopened the case. The lead investigator later admitted that the Reddit thread had basically handed them a roadmap, pointing them directly to evidence they had completely overlooked for 2 decades.
And you know, the thread didn't just point to a killer. It painted this deeply disturbing picture of a predator. Users found interviews with Alyssa's friends who described Thomas as incredibly controlling and abusive. They said he had threatened them and even stalked Alyssa at her own school.
So the tension hits its absolute peak when the police execute a search warrant on Thomas's property. They're digging up the backyard. They're scouring that storage unit. The Reddit thread is live. Thousands of users are just hitting refresh, 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 waiting for a break. And then the update comes. The police found nothing. No body, no DNA, no conclusive evidence. The thread just went silent. For a minute there, it really seemed like the killer had won.
But these digital detectives, oh, they were not done. They pivoted. They started looking at Thomas's other properties, and they found one, a cabin up in the mountains about 2 hours from Phoenix, which he had sold back in 2005. And get this, the new owners had reported strange smells coming from the basement. The police moved in on that cabin. They brought in ground-penetrating radar and found some anomalies in the soil, so they started to dig. And this time, they found something, a single fragment of bone. It was too small for a DNA match, but it was enough. It was enough to change everything. This was now, officially, a homicide investigation. And finally, in June 2021, 20 years after Alyssa disappeared, Thomas Turney was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The Reddit thread absolutely celebrated. It seemed like the final resolution. But that celebration, it was short-lived. Thomas refused to cooperate and just denied everything.
And then the story took its final, incredibly frustrating twist. In November of 2022, before he could even stand trial, Thomas Turney died in jail from heart failure. He was 72 years old.
He took the truth to his grave. To this day, Alyssa's body has never been found. The Reddit thread had solved the case, they'd identified the killer, but it couldn't deliver complete justice. The killer was gone, but the full story remains a mystery.
The thread itself became this huge phenomenon. It sparked a massive debate about the internet's role in criminal justice. Some people called it a modern-day miracle of crowdsourced investigation. Others warned about the dangers of online witch hunts, where speculation can ruin innocent lives. But for Alyssa's sister Sarah, it meant everything. She posted one final message to the thread. You did what the system could not. You listened, you cared, you never gave up.
In the end, the story of Alyssa Turney is a powerful reminder that in our digital age, no secret is ever entirely safe. The truth can hide in plain sight for years, just waiting for the right person, or in this case, a community of people, to connect the dots. Her story doesn't end with a conviction in a courtroom, but with a community of strangers who refuse to let her be forgotten. And it leaves us with a pretty provocative question. How many other cold cases are out there, with clues just buried in the archives of the internet, waiting for just one post, one question, to bring them back to life?